Is globalization an attack on democracy? Human societies across the globe have established progressively closer contacts over many centuries, but recently the pace has dramatically increased. Jet airplanes, cheap telephone service, email, computers, huge ocean-going vessels, and instant capital flows. All of these have helped make the world more interdependent than ever. Multinational corporations manufacture products in many countries and sell to consumers around the world. Money, technology, and raw materials move swiftly across national borders, as well as ideas and cultures. As a result, laws, economies, and social movements are forming at the international level. Many politicians, academics, and journalists treat these trends as both inevitable and, on the whole, welcome. But for billions of the world's people, a business-driven globalization means uprooting old ways of life and threatening livelihoods and cultures and the environment. So, globalization is a good thing, right? Well, I enjoy my cell phone, my internet, and the ability to buy organic fair trade coffee. So, globalization has not only provided us with these things, it has also been instrumental in maintaining global social movements. I'm going to try to keep this complex situation as simple as possible, but there is much to say about the powers that are steering the globalization movement, such as the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and I could get into stuff like neoliberalism and even Keynesian economics. And I want you to know I'm not anti-capitalistic or against international trade. I simply believe we should have a fair trade system where people get a voice, and corporations should be chartered on a national level so that they are responsible for the damages in the region that they operate. So, I'll stick to the basics with this video. Globalization is just one of an array of concepts and arguing points that have been mobilized to advance the corporate agenda. Like free trade, globalization has an aura of virtue. Just as freedom must be good, so globalization hints on internationalism and solidarity between countries, as opposed to nationalism and protectionism, which have negative connotations. Simply put, globalization's kind of like Star Trek, except with the greed and corruption. The elites have done well because globalization has helped keep wages down. Income inequality rose incredibly both within and between countries. In the United States, despite a 35% increase in productivity between 1973 and 1995, inequality rose to its highest levels in 70 years. And underemployment, job insecurity, benefit loss, and worker speed up under lean production systems all increased. And the high insecurity levels for the workers reduced their well-being and democratic power. The top 300,000 Americans collectively enjoyed almost as much income as the bottom 150 million Americans. I'm not saying people shouldn't strive to make more money, but per person the top group received 440 times as much as the average person in the bottom half earned, nearly doubling the gap from 1980. This brings us to the world scene, and there, per capita incomes have fallen in more than 70 countries over the last 20 years. Some 3 billion people, half the world's population, live on or under $2 a day, and 800 million suffer from malnutrition. In the third world, underemployment and unemployment are rampant. Massive poverty exists side by side with a growing elite. Globalization of recent decades was never a democratic choice by the peoples of the world. The process has been business-driven by business strategies for business ends. Governments have helped by incremental policy actions and by larger actions that were often taken in secret by organizations such as the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the CFR, and the IMF, who, interestingly enough, is the 20th seat at the G20 meetings. Some examples of major actions advancing the globalization process are the passing of the North American Free Trade Arrangement or the formation of the European Monetary Union. Here, the public was subjected to massive propaganda campaigns by the interested business media elites. In the United States, public opinion polls showed the general public against NAFTA, even after insistent propaganda. But the mass media supported it, and it was passed. In Europe as well, polls have shown persistent majorities opposed to the introduction of the euro, but a powerful elite supports it. So, it moves forward. This undemocratic process, carried out with a democratic facade, is constant. Globalization has steadily weakened democracy. One of the main objectives of the multinational corporate movement abroad has been to tap cheap labor sources. Labor is often cheapest and less prone to cause employer problems in states such as, say, Indonesia or China, that curb unions and enter into virtual joint venture arrangements with foreign capital, shifting resources from the more expensive to the less costly location, in a process that penalizes and thereby weakens democracy. This reflects a corporate and anti-labor policy agenda, fully institutionalized. A large part of democracy is said to rest on the existence of groups like labor organizations that can bargain and work on behalf of an otherwise silent population. The deliberate weakening of such groups is thus an attack on democracy. And what else do people have to offer other than labor in this environment? The corporate and Wall Street campaign has been highly successful because huge sums of business money fed to the mass media have allowed their views to prevail. But this is a corruption of democracy. It is a bought market of ideas, not a free market of ideas.
5-4 decision ends limits on how much any corporation can spend on political campaign ads. There is no limit. Produce a movie, buy every commercial. You don't even have to disclose your name. You can call yourself Americans for America, but secretly be in favor of any number of special interests.
The business community has also mounted a powerful effort to dominate governments by limiting their ability to serve ordinary citizens. By enlarging business profits and weakening labor, it has shifted the balance of power further towards business, so that political parties have been even more influenced by business money in elections. Another well-known and important anti-democratic force is the power of the global financial markets to limit political options. We can see this strongly with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who incidentally is the 20th seat at the G20. Each of the 19 countries of the G20 are represented by a finance minister who may or may not have been elected, and the head of each country's bank. Being Canadian, I'd like to mention our appointed bank representative is Mark Carney from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. Interestingly enough, Mark spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs before heading the Canadian banking system. I don't know about you, but if someone comes from a business culture of fraudulent behavior, it begs the question, whose interests are being represented?
Max, if I could start with you, I mean, what is it about Goldman Sachs? How does it manage to turn the figures around like that?
Well, Goldman Sachs are scum. I mean, that's the bottom line. They basically have co-opted the U.S. government. They've co-opted the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve functionality. They've co-opted the Obama administration. Barack Obama, dances to Goldman Sachs' tune, and they are really crooked and abominable in what they've done. You just remember Hank Paulson held Congress hostage, took him in the back room and said, give us $700 billion. We're going to crash this market. He's an arsonist. He's an outlaw, and yet he's given praise.
Ex-Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, who was CEO at Goldman Sachs.
Sure, but if you go down the list, they're all Goldman Sachs scum. Whether it's Hank Paulson, whether it's Geithner has very close ties to Goldman Sachs, and of course, all these banking bonuses are paid out to all their cronies who are Goldman Sachs scum. And America, for some reason, has allowed this coup d'etat to take place, a silent coup d'etat, where the Goldman Sachs and their friends now control the U.S. government, and they are manipulating prices.
So Goldman Sachs was the only investment bank in the United States that didn't get into this game
of selling that,
selling and buying empty boxes.
Yes, but they created many of these empty boxes. They then bet against their own clients to whom they sold these empty boxes. They coerced the federal government to get rid of their main competitors in Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, who were selling these empty boxes. They co-opted foreign banks who owned these empty boxes, who went through tremendous pain and suffering. And they are also now caught in front-running every single trade on the New York Stock Exchange with this high-frequency trading scandal. They're literally stealing $100 million a day. Goldman Sachs is stealing every day on the floor of the exchange. They should be in The Hague. They should be taken up on financial terrorism charges, and they should all be thrown in jail. They're scum.
Stay tuned for part 2 of 2, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.